Good day and welcome to the final episode of the limited run HEARTcare podcast and learn series. This coached podcast series was designed to teach you about workplace well-being while prompting you to be physically active and mentally engaged. My name is Astrid Kendrick, and I've been studying compassion fatigue and burnout in educational workers since early 2020. This podcast series is one of the outcomes of my research program, as participants have asked for different ways to learn and feel better at their own pace and in their own space. This final episode will focus you on your next steps with HEARTcare, maintaining your well-being, and introduce some concepts related to compassionate pedagogy. Before we get started in our learning today, choose a walking path that is about 2 to 3 kilometers in length. Keep an eye out for tripping hazards and make sure you are dressed for the weather. Not in the mood for a walk? Never a problem. Choose an activity that will keep you busy for about 30 minutes. If you have a tracking device, press start and let's get going.
Today's episode will review the main information we've covered in this podcast and prompt you to reflect on your progress with your goals. All the way back in episode 1, we talked about compassion and secondary traumatic stress, sometimes called compassion fatigue. You'll remember that compassion is the noticing, feeling, and acting to relieve the suffering of another person. Equally important is self-compassion, which is the act of noticing and alleviating your own suffering. As noted by Dr. Paul Bloom, not all suffering is bad. Humans need to experience some challenge to find meaning in their life. Without some chosen hardship, such as training for a long run or raising kids, humans can struggle to find a reason or purpose in their life. But unchosen suffering, that is brought about by forces beyond our control, such as forest fires, wars, abuse, or neglect, should always be prevented and relieved as much as possible. In education, we want to challenge our students to learn, knowing full well that learning involves some chosen suffering. We can follow the principles of a compassionate pedagogy to both help students through difficult times and support them when necessary. Compassionate pedagogy was defined by Sethuranman in 2025 as an intentional set of teaching practices that notices learner distress or disadvantage, acts to mitigate this distress or disadvantage, and promotes well-being and treats learners as whole persons, not just intellectual performers. As you listen to this first song, consider ways to assess students with compassion without reducing the quality of learning. How can you create meaningful assessments that challenge students without causing unnecessary stress?
One aspect of developing a compassionate pedagogy relates to decisions about assessment practices. Compassionate assessment does not mean sacrificing quality or rigor to avoid challenging students to try difficult things. Instead, it means being thoughtful and intentional about matching child development, workload, due date timing, and reasonable expectations for both yourself, staff, and students. Some practices that could be considered compassionate assessment include multimodal assignments, flexible due dates, or scaffolded assignments. As you listen to this second song, think about the way you structured your last course, year, or lesson. Would you classify your assessment practices during this work as compassionate? Why or why not?
Following a compassionate pedagogical stance doesn't mean eliminating all hardship, struggle, or challenge. It means mitigating all harmful or unnecessary hardship, struggle, and challenge from teaching and learning practices and strategies. For example, you may have a large class, and realistically, quizzes are the most efficient way to find out if your students are learning the material and meeting learning objectives. Running compassionate assessments doesn't mean making your quiz too easy or automatically giving 100% to everyone who writes it. It means thoughtful scheduling of the quiz. Instead of starting it as soon as students enter the classroom, build in a 10-minute settle-in routine so that students who are running late or need a moment to calm their nerves can manage their stress reaction and activate their cognitive facilities. If you're planning a timed assessment, such as an in-class essay, do it yourself first to make sure that the time you have planned is sufficient for students' development and abilities. A good rule of thumb is that it will take your students about 3 times longer to complete a timed assessment than it takes you to do the same. So if you can finish the task in 10 minutes, providing your students with 30 to 40 minutes is fair.
Another practice to try out as part of having a compassionate pedagogy is through the slow professor movement, which first gained notice in about 2013 through the work of Maggie Berg and Barbara Sieber. They proposed slowing down the teaching and learning process so that students could engage more fully with knowledge and content. Rather than expecting more and more and more from students, they suggested that professors should provide fewer but more thoughtful products. For example, instead of having students write 3 short essays, they could spend more time writing one longer essay with multiple points for feedback and redevelopment. The upside of reducing the volume of tasks required by students is that the teacher has more time to spend on feedback for each task. Rather than speeding from grading one assignment to the next, the teacher can spend more time with deepening student understanding or expecting mastery from students on one well-crafted product that developed over time. This movement lines up nicely with the practice of scaffolding assignments within project-based learning design. Rather than developing several different units with an assortment of assignments, students can work on one interdisciplinary product with several touch points for learning and growth. As you listen to this next song, think about the timing of your instruction and assessment. Do you move quickly through every curricular outcome and speed along to the next unit test? Or are you able to match the timing of your class to your students' development? What are your experiences with moving slowly through curriculum or speeding along?
Building a sense of belonging in our classrooms is a fundamental responsibility of a teacher. One way to help students connect with each other is through group work. But we sometimes forget that not all students know how to collaborate effectively with their peers. While group work can lessen stress from some students by reducing their overall workload, it can increase stress if students don't know how to delegate effectively, communicate diplomatically, or lead compassionately. Direct instruction about how to work with others is necessary if you decide to assign group work. In particular, a skill that needs to be developed is sharing conversation time. Dr. Theo Gilbert has studied the impact of the group monopolizer, the person who speaks over or through all other group members. When students are asked to work together, they may have no idea how to ensure equitable talk time or how to indicate to a monopolizer that someone else should have time to speak. His research supports ways that using eye gaze can help group members compassionately indicate to the monopolizer that it was another person's time to talk. As you listen to this next song, consider ways that you can teach students about effective collaboration. If you're not sure, who can you ask to help you?
If you're out for a walk, you should be making your way back to your home base. As always, use this final part of the podcast to increase your heart rate to get more benefits from your physical activity. At the risk of looking goofy, I'm going to do some high knees and butt kicks to get my muscles moving differently. Engaging compassionately with students means mitigating unchosen suffering and designing lessons and assessments for well-being, both for themselves and you. It also means reaching out for help and support when you feel overwhelmed or burned out, rather than intensifying your own suffering by pushing through alone. As you finish up your walk, bring to mind a mentor or mentors who have made a difference in your professional practice. Consider listening to episode 6 with Chris Fuzezi for more information about mentorship and mantras for well-being. What made them effective mentors for you? How can you apply what they taught you to support your own students or colleagues? Thanks so much for listening to this final episode, and be sure to visit the HEARTcare Educators website at www.heartcareeducators.ca for more information and resources, or to access the rest of the podcast series. I've enjoyed creating this limited podcast series, and I hope that you've learned useful tips and tricks to improve your well-being and teaching practice. Thanks to the Taylor Institute Teaching and Learning Grants Program at the University of Calgary for providing the funding to create this series. Special shout out to my podcast co-pilot, Pat Hanlon, and the editor of this series, Zach DeMello, as well as research assistants Muskan Pamery and Tracy Din for their behind-the-scenes work. I leave you with my favorite saying, nothing easy is worth doing, and nothing worth doing is easy. Thank you for listening.